Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The United States buys 2 weeks to decide whether or not to join Israel's war against Iran, even as the conflict enters the second week. Both Tel Aviv and Tehran refuse to blink and accuse each other of bombing civilian sites. The European Union tries to reason with Iran, even as its supreme leader takes a hard stance. The Israeli military claimed to have attacked dozens of Iranian military sites overnight. Tel Aviv also claims that Iran fired cluster bombs at Israel with the aim to increase civilian casualties. Meanwhile, reports suggest that Iranian missiles targeted Israel's tech park in Beersheba that also housed Microsoft's office. EU ambassador to India added that there's still a window for diplomacy and Iran should seize it. Listen in.
One should not forget that the EU has been in negotiation with Iran on its nuclear program for years. That was called the JCPOA. Unfortunately, this preferred way of actually reaching a deal never materialized. The EU has made its position very clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, that we've continually said that Iran was not compliant with its own obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that there is still a window for diplomacy, and that Iran would be well advised to seize that window for diplomacy.
We believe these aggressions should be stopped as soon as possible. It could be done via international joint effort. Those countries like India, who are the voice of the South, the big countries who actually are in favor of peace, they should coordinate and put pressure on Israel. But I think at the first step, they should condemn this action not to be happen in the future.
To take this discussion forward, we are now joined by Major Dan Pfefferman, and a retired IDF officer and expert on Middle East. Major Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Global Eye. Let me begin by asking you, the European Union, Germany, France, these countries are going to sit down and talk to Iran today to see if there is a diplomatic way out. If they propose to Israel and Iran a solution out of this crisis to end the war, is Israel in a mood for accepting a diplomatic solution?
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. Israel would have been in the mood for any kind of diplomatic solution many years ago that puts an end to Iran's nuclear program, which is almost entirely focused on threatening Israel's very existence, on the ballistic missile programs, which, as we see unfolding this week and as we have seen over the last 2 years and well before, provide Iran itself and its army of proxies around the region a tool with which to terrorize Israeli civilians. And a path to get Iran out of its state of constant belligerency against Israel, whether directly or indirectly or diplomatically or economically. So the only reason that Israel attacked was because diplomacy was not putting an end to all of these threats. It is clear that Iran was getting dangerously close to the capacity to have both enough enriched material, plus it already has the capability with which to deliver it. And the negotiations from Iran's point of view were just a way to buy time while continuing to bypass or to skirt or to get around the NPT or the IAEA's restrictions, even per Iran's own commitments to the JCPOA. It's clear that it was just trying to buy time and find ways to continue sneaking closer and closer to a nuclear weapons program. So as far as we're concerned here in Israel, diplomacy would have always been the preferable option. But it was clear to us that Iran was never actually committed to diplomacy. And so Israeli leaders took the decision before it was too late.
So are you saying that whatever happens now in Europe in terms of negotiations between EU leaders and Iran, that is not going to be acceptable to Israel at all? Or will there be certain benchmarks, if achieved, then you will accept it?
I believe it's the latter. I believe that if certain benchmarks are achieved, as far as completely taking away Iran's ability to enrich uranium and the weaponization programs, which it was supposed to not be doing anyway, and the commitments to stop producing ballistic missiles that literally threaten our country. I mean, 2 missiles this past week landed within a kilometer of my house. These are meant for only terrorist purposes, to terrorize. One landed on a hospital yesterday, right? So if Iran were in good faith and feeling the pressure that it's feeling now to come to the negotiating table, whether with the Europeans, whether with the Americans, or even under Indian auspices, for and commit to actually taking away these capabilities and abiding by agreements that it makes, Israel would be very happy, because war is always a last resort. And we, the citizens, we, the country, we pay the direct price for it.
Right. In terms of the current escalations, the war continues. What's going to be next in terms of Israel's action to put pressure on Iran to eliminate its nuclear capabilities? What next can we expect from Israel in terms of stepping up the military action and also the intensity of weapons that are used?
So what we're looking at right now is a sort of an escalation ladder, an escalation plan. If I'm seeing what the Israel Defense Forces, the Israel Air Force is doing, is that they mapped out a whole series, a plan of what it essentially means to neutralize, to cripple, or to set back, at the very least, Iran's, first and foremost, nuclear program, secondly, its ballistic missile program, and thirdly, its general defense and intelligence infrastructure. The first part of it would have been to neutralize Iran's air defense capabilities, but Israel actually did that when Iran launched 2 separate barrages of 200 and then 100 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier in this year. And so in the reprisal to those Iranian attacks on Israel, Israel actually already took out Iran's air defense capabilities. And so the plan, the escalation ladder, had actually been moved up by about a week. What we can see now is that a continued degradation of Iran's missile capability, defense manufacturing capabilities. Iran produces much of its own defense hardware, whether it's missiles or UAVs. Continued attacks as much as possible on the weapons program, the nuclear program, recognizing that Israel alone doesn't have the capability to fully neutralize it, and if need be, to continue stepping up the pressure on the regime itself. Perhaps another escalation step that we could see is on energy or transport infrastructure, for example, on the Bandar Abbas port, which is a strategic port for Iran, or on major oil or gas installations. And so all of this is potentially still in play. Obviously, I don't have the plans in front of me, but you could continue seeing a ramping up both of pressure, but at the same time, a ramping up of neutralizing Iran's capabilities to wage war, and with the end goal that Iran does come back to the negotiating table with the whether it's the Europeans or the Americans, and commit in a verifiable way to cease its nuclear enrichment, nuclear weapons program, and its ballistic missile programs.
All right, Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much for joining us on the program, giving us your view on the escalations and what Israel could do next. Let's see what happens in the talks between European Union and Iran later this evening. We're going to take a short break, but up next, President Trump continues to claim he stopped India-Pakistan war after hosting Field Marshal Asim Munir in the White House. I caught up with D.P. Srivastav, ex-Indian envoy to Iran and author of the book Pakistan, Ideologies, Strategies and Interests, on what this means for India.